Welcome to Treasure Isle, studio that we designed in '81, opened September 22nd, 1982. And we'll point out some of the features that's made it one of the hit studios in Nashville over the last nearly 40 years. So step this way. Treasure Isle was the first what they call LEDE, or live end, dead end studio in Nashville. Its dimensions are 42 by 30 with 24-foot ceilings. We're at the live end now. If you'll notice, the floors, the ceiling, and the walls are all wood. They're all hard, reflective surfaces. To compare it to our original studio on 17th Avenue, or what is now Music Square West, my whole entire studio was 1,250 square feet. Within that 1,250 square feet, I had a control room, a tracking room, a tech room, a lobby, and a musician's lounge. I could fit all that studio, the entire studio, into this control room and actually tracking room, and still have room to walk around the perimeter. So that gives you an idea of the size of this room. It's one of the largest tracking rooms in Nashville, and it has what is known as the best drum sound. George Massenberg, who's one of our top award-winning Grammy and CMA award-winning producers and engineers, said that Treasure Isle is simply the best live tracking room in Music City, USA. So we're proud to have had George as a client. He's done several albums here. And some of the other features in this room, there are no right angles in the room. They're all non-parallel walls, all different angles, all mathematically worked out, so there's no standing sound waves. So if you will, look around the ceiling where it hits the walls, you'll see that there are all these weird angles, 12 degrees, 30 degrees, 40 degrees, etc. But there are no right angles, and that means there'll be no standing sound waves. So it's a better sonic sound. That's what we were looking for when we went back and reviewed all these great albums that we admired, that we respected, from Pet Sounds to Sgt. Pepper to Alan Parsons Project to Rubber Soul. They were just great albums because of the large rooms that they were tracked in. And this is one of those large rooms. So we have the drums down here at the live end. We could also do percussions and strings and horns. We just got done with a string date within the last week or so. A violin, viola, cello, etc. And we can separate by using these movable walls called baffles. You'll see a number of them around here. We can isolate different instruments. We can isolate horns from strings, etc., etc. So those are an important part of the studio. If we walk down, going east now, going along the studio here, and if you'll back up as we go along, we're going to go from the live end into what we call the dead end. The dead end is unique because, unlike the live end, we have carpet on the floor, which provides insulation. We have insulation on the ceiling, and we have insulation on 2 of the 3 walls. So this is the dead end. The room we just left was the live end, and it's built kind of like a concert hall. The live end would be the stage, and the dead end would be where the audience would sit. In this case, instead of the audience sitting here, we'll just move down this way a little bit, point out some of the rooms to you. Behind you is our large ISO. This is where we would cut guitars. The amplifiers, or the cabinets, would be in that large ISO booth and mic'd. And then the guitar players, the lead guitar, electric guitar players, would be out here. And you can see their effects and their tops, their amplifier tops, their foot effects, all the gadgets and the gizmos right down there on the floor, and their amplifier cabinets. would be in the isolation inside this large booth. When we get done tracking and the amplifier cases, cabinets come out, that's where we typically also do the live lead vocals. So Jason Aldean or future Johnny Cash would do their vocals in that large isolation booth. Now we're in the large ISO booth, which we pointed out earlier. During a tracking session, this is where the guitar cabinets would be, the electric guitar cabinets. And you can see on the floor here that there are two microphones getting ready to pick up the sound. The cabinets for the guitar amplifiers would be set up in front. When you pan up here to one of our vocal mics, this is where the lead singer would do his keeper vocals. They do the scratch vocals in the control room, as we pointed out earlier. Then when it's ready to do the keeper vocals, the one you're actually going to hear on the recording, on the finished recording, they would do it in this room here typically. Occasionally we do it out in the big tracking room. Also we would do maybe harmonies, a quartet or a trio out there, but typically we do the lead vocal, keeper vocal in this room right here. And you can see the baffles set up that the singer would stand behind. They typically have a stool here so they can be comfortable, although they typically stand up while they're doing the actual singing. So that's, this is where the action is. This is where the keeper vocal is. This is the one that you would hear on the final performance and mixed up and ready to go and on the radio and or at retail or on the internet, on one of the digital download sites. This is one of those great mic moments right here. This is one of the stations where a musician would sit during a recording session. This one here is kind of in the area where the lead guitar or the electric guitar would be set up. These little boxes right here, they're called a more me system. Unlike the 40s, 50s, and 60s, and even the 70s, when the engineer would feed a headphone mix to the musicians, now we have the ability to give them their own mixing station. They can mix it any way they want. The guitarist may not want to hear as much keyboards. He may want to hear more of himself, or he may want to hear more of the drummer and bass player, and they would dial that up on these little cue systems. This microphone here is so he can talk to the producer and to the engineer and have them adjust volume or whatever. So this is his little microphone that goes into the control room. Now as you pan around, you'll see similar stations set up. This one over here where you're at now is for the keyboard station, which is where the B3 organ or a clavinet, whatever. Over here would be typically a bass player and a steel guitar player would be over in these two sections over here. And then finally over on the rear end, the far end where the live end of the room is, would be the drummer's system. They actually call it a more me system. In other words, I want to hear more of me. That's how it came about. They can mix it up any way they want. Cut out instruments, build up instruments, turn their own volume up, turn their own volume down. That's why it's called a more me. So that's the way that musicians are all connected to each other. They all hear it on headphones. They have their own little mixing station. They can communicate with the producer and engineer by talking into this microphone here, and each of them have one at their station, as you will see. The drummer has one, the steel has one, the keyboard guy has one, so they're all able to communicate and talk back and forth and listen back and forth to each other as the sound's coming down. And that's pretty much the story of the tracking room and the way we go about tracking a record. We do it in basically 4 stages. The first is the rhythm section. Like I said, the electric guitar, acoustic guitar, drums, keyboards, bass. There might be an extra electric guitar on it. There might be an extra acoustic guitar. There might be a fiddle or a steel, but typically it's 5 or 6 pieces. You get a great track. That's the foundation. It's like building a house. Put down the foundation first. That's the rhythm section. Then you put up the walls. The stud walls go up. That's the overdubs. Percussion, more guitar, synthesizer, strings, horns. whatever that particular piece of music calls for. So that's the walls, that's the second phase. Then you do the keeper vocal, the one that we're going to hear on the final performance. Then you tune that vocal. Then you do the background vocal, which is typically the last overdub. After the lead vocal has been tuned, you do the background vocal. And then finally, you put the roof on the house, and that's mixing, and that's all done in the control room at the main console. So that's how you go about building a record in 2019 and beyond. If we swing around here, this is our acoustic piano ISO, or isolation booth. This is a Yamaha C7, and it's one of the best pianos in the city. It has a great live sound, very bright, and you can pick it up immediately on the records that it accompanies. Outside the ISO is a Hammond Vintage B3 organ. That particular B3 came out of a studio in Memphis. It was one of our first items that we purchased for Treasure Isle before we opened as Island Recorders down on Music Row. This particular B3 has a distinction of being played by not only the great A-team of the current generation, but also played by the great Isaac Hayes and the great Billy Preston, both members of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. So that's a special organ, and inside this ISO, towards the rear, you see the Leslie cabinet, and that gives it the whirling sound that's associated with a B3 organ. And we'll walk back out into the tracking area. Along the wall to the control room over here, typically on the right end would be the electric bass, and on the left end, if there is a steel, the steel would typically be on the left end here where that chair is. So you got your electric guitars here, the drums there, the bass over in the far corner, the steel here if there is a steel on the session, and then the acoustic piano in this ISO, and then the B3 in that corner. Also, typically there'll be a clavinet or a Wurlitzer or a synthesizer in this section here, or an electric piano. If you look up, you'll see a box up there, kind of a balcony. We call it the crow's nest at Treasure Isle. This is an additional ISO, so if we wanted to have a second or third electric guitar, we could put their cabinets up there to isolate them from the other electric guitar cabinets in the big ISO. If we wanted to have a fiddle, the fiddle could be up there. It's just a separate isolation, and we call it the crow's nest. It also is a great way to overlook the studio if we're doing a music video. We've done a number of music videos here: Alabama, Bill Monroe, Jason Aldean, the Byrds. We've done a number of photo shoots and videos here, and that's just a great place for it. If we walk straight ahead over here, this was built as our lead vocal ISO. Because it has perfect line of sight with the producer and the engineer in the control room. We used it initially for our lead vocal ISO. We now have adapted it to use it for acoustic guitar, for mandolin, for ganjo, for banjo, for the acoustic instruments. We now use it for that. We cut the tracking vocals in the control room, and we do the final vocals or the keeper vocals in the large ISO that I showed you earlier. And we'll explain that part of it when we get into the control room. But this is our acoustic ISO, primarily acoustic guitar and mandolin. Okay, here's a close-up of the Private Q headphone system here. As you'll see from left to right, you've got percussion, bass, 2 tracks of acoustic guitar, 2 tracks of electric guitar, vocals, the click track, the keyboards, and the drums. And that's up to the musicians to mix it any way he wants. He can bring in instruments or fade out instruments. He can bring himself up in the headphone mix. He can lower the headphone mix. He can, you know, have a concentration of drums and bass, which is kind of the foundation of a rhythm section or a tracking section. So that's the private cue system. It's called a more me system because if they want to hear more of themselves or more me, they can adjust it and then they'll have that capability. This is ground control. This is the control room. This is, you know, where the engineer and the producer would sit along with a tech or a second engineer. Some of the key features, this is a Trident 80 5.1 console. It was built for us. It's one of a kind. If you were to go around to the back of it, the VIN plate or the serial number is USA 1. So it's one of a kind. The black modules on both ends are Trident 80, an historic module. Trident was named after the famous Trident Studio in London, England. Trident Studios recorded such greats as the Beatles, David Bowie, the Rolling Stones, and of course Elton John. And so this is a great console by a great British company, and this is our fourth Trident that we've had in just barely 40 years. These are the faders where you would mix different instruments, levels of different instruments. The different knobs are EQ and mic preamps. And then what we call the close reference monitors. Behind those baffles there, behind the cloth, are what we call the bigs, the large speakers. We don't use bigs as much anymore as we did back in the 80s and early mid-90s because they don't really give you a true effect of what it's going to sound like in somebody's car radio or somebody's living room or on earbuds on a handheld device or a boombox when they were popular or a Walkman when they were popular. It's closer to the close reference monitors. And we have 2 or 3 different brands, Dynaudio, we have Yamaha NS10s, which are a vintage close ref, and we also have Tannoy, which are great, they're English. If you would look over, since you're looking this way, this is Pro Tools. People, you've all heard about Pro Tools. This is, we call it recording in a box. It's all controlled by the computer brains and the keyboard, and there's the monitor, and that's the Pro Tools system. A lot of the newer engineers are not even being trained on analog or 2-inch tape. We actually have 2 24-track analog tape machines. They're directly behind you, so if you swing around, you'll be able to look at one of our 2 24-track 2-inch tape recorders. And then if you swing a little bit to the left, you'll see our signal processing gear, or what we call outboard gear, and that's in these racks that surround you, that engulf you here. Signal processing gear or outboard gear is just a way of adding effects, strengthening vocals, guitars, keyboards, cutting out certain noise that you don't want on the recording. It just enhances the sound that you're bringing out of the microphones and onto or through the board and onto the hard drive or the tape, whichever format you're recording on. So the API rack here, GML, just LA2As, LA3As, noise gates, compressors, mic preamps. This is all outboard gear. This is all special effects that make your record sound better. And all engineers have their own pet favorites, their own favorite outboard gear. The portable rack that you might have scanned, it was immediately behind you, is an engineer who's going to be working at the studio or has worked at the studio, and he will bring that in a road case and use it for projects that he's working on. The patch bay that you're shooting next, you're looking at next, is where we connect all the different microphones and effects, so it goes through the console. On the right side is the brains to the Pro Tools, those 3 silver things, and then at the bottom is our radar hard drive, and radar is the next best thing to analog. In my opinion, it's much better than Pro Tools. It's not as well known, but it has these excellent analog converters in it, so that to the human ear, to most people, unless you're really trained in audio, you can't tell the difference between radar and 24-track 2-inch analog. It's very, very similar. If you're a hit producer or engineer, you might be able to tell, but most people would not be able to tell. Above is a 1/4-inch tape deck. We use that for what we call a slap echo. We use it as an echo or a special effect. And then what you can't see, but what is outside the lobby or lounge space, above the hallway and above our men's and ladies room, is a 2,200 cubic foot live echo chamber. Live echo chambers were made famous primarily by Capitol Record Studios in LA at 1750 North Vine. Live chambers give that special sound, particularly vocals and drums. There's only a handful of studios in Nashville that have a true live echo chamber, and we're one of them. It's just a great sound effect that you don't hear about much anymore. Not only don't hear about it, but they aren't used that much anymore because there aren't that many of them. But we have one. Our next door neighbors, Blackbird, has one. Garth just installed a new one at his studio in the old Jack's Tracks down on 16th Avenue. He's got a live chamber, so he appreciates the live sound. And that's pretty much it. This control room pretty much is a mirror image of the tracking room. It has the bright live end at the back, which is wood ceiling, wood walls, wood floors, and then at the front is the more of the dead end with the insulation carpet on the floors and insulation on the ceiling and on the walls. So that's the live end dead end control room versus the live end dead end tracking room. One more thing to show off while we're here in the control room. This is our tracking microphone. This is where Jason Aldean or the lead singer or vocalist would record their scratch vocal. It's not meant to be a keeper vocal. You're not going to hear that vocal on the finished record on your favorite radio station or on YouTube or on your hard drive, your music selection. It's strictly for a reference. It's to give the musicians who are out in the big room a chance to hear your vocal, hear your range, figure out the right tempo, do all the experimentation before we do the completed version, and then we're going to do the keeper vocal, the one that you are going to hear on the record or are going to hear on the live performance. We're going to do that out in the big ISO room. So this is the mic we use. All of the artists that have come here in the last 10 years or so have used this microphone or a similar microphone in this very position right here to do their scratch vocal. Obviously the singer, the lead singer or the star, would be able to see virtually all the musicians within his sight. You can see the drummer, you can see the bass player, the lead guitar player, you can look over his right shoulder and see the acoustic guitar player or the mandolin player. About the only person that he can't see from this position is the keyboard player. It's a little bit difficult since it's right on the other side of this wall. But everything else, he's got line of sight. He can see everything going on. He can look over his left shoulder, and the producer and the engineer is sitting there at the console taking it all down and giving him directions or her directions. And this is the lead vocal microphone. Now, back in the old days when Nashville started as Music City, USA, or they were recording in LA, or they were recording in New York or Atlanta or Dallas, it was all live to tape. Well, later it was live to tape. It was all live to disc or all live to wire recorder. There was basically only one track, mono, and they would record everything live and they would mix it on the fly. In other words, as the music was going down and your guitars, your bass, your drums, maybe horns or strings, as they were recording all that, it was being mixed live. And there were no opportunities, there was no technology to do an overdub or tune a vocal, so you had to do everything live. Sinatra would do that out in LA at Capitol with 40 or 50 or 60 musicians in the room. Nelson Riddle leading the orchestra, you know, a rhythm section would be there, even the background harmonies. You know, nowadays we do everything in segments or phases. Phase one is the rhythm section: guitar, bass, drums, keyboard, and acoustic guitar. So lead guitar, electric guitar, acoustic guitar, bass, and drums, and keyboard. And then the lead vocal that we're putting down at that point is a scratch vocal. It's a reference vocal only. It's not meant to be used on the final record that you would hear on your iPhone or your handheld device or on the radio in your car or whatever. Then we would do a number of vocals, overdubs, background vocals. Of course, you got to tune the lead vocal in most cases, and that whole process can take, like I said earlier, anywhere from 35 hours up to 50 hours a track, and that's you know, that's the way they make records nowadays. But back in the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, into the very early 60s, it was all done live to tape. There were no overdubs for, you know, basically there were no overdubs. It was all done live, either to disc or to tape. And now it's completely different. I mean, when Elvis was recording at RCA Studio B, when, you know, some of the other great artists were recording over there, Jim Ed Brown and the Browns, Roy Orbison, you know, some of the great artists, it was only 2 or 3 tracks. And they would do 2 sides, the A and the B side of a 45 or 78 record, in the space of about 3 hours with breaks, and it was all done live. And now, you know, where we are 2019, you know, it's taking 30 to 50 hours to do one song. So this is what Treasure Isle is all about. It's a one-of-a-kind studio in a one-of-a-kind city, Nashville, Tennessee. And I've enjoyed showing it to you, and look forward to maybe meeting some of you aspiring singers or singer-songwriters or bands down the road. We'd love to have you here, and we'd love to show you the studio firsthand. Be glad to give you a tour of it so you can see it up close and personal, and we can play you a couple of things that were recorded here. And that right now, as of we speak, that amounts to somewhere between $2 and $3 billion of music has been recorded in this studio with some of the greatest people in country and rock and CCM and jazz and folk music, Americana music. I mean, we've been so proud of the people we've been able to work with here. And as I said in one of our earlier interviews, the ghosts of Johnny Cash and the great Waylon Jennings, who recorded his last studio album here, are still roaming around to encourage you and to inspire you. And that's all within the walls of Treasure Isle, the best studio and the best vibe and the best sound in Music City, USA. Have a great day.